see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Good morning, Active Church. You feeling excited being at church today? So great to see you. Hey, my name is Mike, and I serve on the team here at Active Church. We are one church in two locations, and so welcome to our Yucaipa location for a brand new series that we're starting today called Wonder. And it starts today, and it culminates at our Christmas Eve services, and we would love for you to be a part of our Christmas Eve services, especially if you are a part of Active. Man, we would love for you to join one of our activator teams that evening. You can jump into one of our 4 services. We have 3 here in Yucaipa. We have 1 in Redlands. One of our 4 services that evening. You can help us to create an incredible environment. Just stop by Guest Central today, and our team would love to direct you and sign you up for that. And if this is your first time with us, we hope it's not your last time with us. We've gotten really good at making our big church, 2 locations, feel small. And one of the best ways to get started with us is to fill out the guest card that's in the seat back in front of you. It says connect with us on the top. And you can fill that out, and then at the end of service, if you would stop by Guest Central, our team would love to meet you. See, we're glad you're here, but it's really important to us that we know your name because we believe that you're worth knowing. And so if you stop by Guest Central today, that'd be awesome. Or you could text welcome to the number that's on the screen. Either way, please stop by Guest Central. In your name, we're going to be sending a soccer ball to the Niños de Baja orphanage. It's an orphanage that we have adopted over the last couple of years. And so for every card and every text that we receive, we're going to send a soccer ball. You can see those soccer balls at Guest Central today. We're going to send it on your behalf and on Active's behalf for Christmas and celebrate Christmas with them and provide hope. So thank you for filling out that card and sending that text. It is the most wonderful time of the year, which is why we're beginning a Christmas series called Wonder. Now, I'm a Christmas fanatic. I love Christmas. Christmas started November 1st at our house. I just want you to know, and all of you that are silently, quietly judging me and thinking that maybe the Bible says something about when Christmas should start, I don't want to get into an argument with you. I don't want you to know that you're wrong. I don't want to have a conversation about that, okay? I just want you to know that I'm glad that you're here, and this season is such a great season. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating to me. The Christmas story is one that engages everybody. You don't have to be a church person, you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to be influenced and shaped by this story. And so this series called Wonder is a series where we're going to ask the question, so what do we do with this story? And how does it shape us? And how should it influence us? And how do we move forward in this story? And so to get started, I want to ask you a question that you can think about this morning, a question that you can ponder for the rest of the week if you'd like. But my question to you is this: what do you wonder? What do you wonder? You and I have the ability to wonder. And we wonder about a lot of things. Maybe for you, you wonder about where you'll be in a year or 5 years. We wonder about maybe who we'll be with in a year or in 5 years. Maybe you wonder about bills, you wonder about family, you wonder about your home, you wonder about your job. Or maybe your wonder is more present day wonder. Maybe this year was a difficult year and you've lost somebody, and so you're wondering what Christmas will be like without them. Or maybe this year was a great year and you found someone, and so you're wondering what Christmas will be like with them. You're hoping your dad and your uncle and your favorite aunt keep their mouth shut at Christmas dinner, right? Because you don't want to be embarrassed and you don't want them to be embarrassed. Maybe for you, that new person is maybe a child that you've adopted or maybe a child that you had biologically. What do you wonder? I am someone whose mind, it just never shuts off. I am the guy that'll wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and then I'm up. I don't know about you, but I'm not worried about anything. I'm not feeling anxious about anything, but when I'm up, my mind wants to play and it thinks about and talks to me about all sorts of different things. So if you're ever up at 2 or 3 in the morning, just send me a direct message. I'm up, all right? Anybody can relate to that? Awesome. We have a lot of psychos in the room too. That's great. Good. I'm not the only one. That's awesome. But I wonder about a lot of things, and my mind is always going, and one of the things that I wonder about is what you wonder about. I wonder about what other people wonder about, especially those that have been through difficult seasons, those that have been through really powerful seasons. I wonder about that. One of my favorite people who ever lived was my grandpa. We called him Gus. This is a photo, actually, of my dad and my brothers and my grandfather from the early 2000s. That's why we look like babies in the photo, including my grandpa. And he passed away about 12 years ago. But his influence still runs deep in my life. And I always wondered what he wondered about, because he had been through it. He was born in 1913. He was the youngest of 13 kids. His sister, who was born before him, her name was Harriet. And then his parents, my great-grandparents, named him Harry. How creative, right? He didn't even have a middle name because they were just at a loss as to what they were going to name him. And so his birth certificate literally reads Harry, and there's a blank and Frisch. So the reason why we called him Gus was because he said his middle name was Gus. And so that just stuck. He was someone who lived through 2 world wars. He fought in the Second World War. He was a Navy spotter, a night watchman, and so he would have to tell the difference between our plane and their plane. He was married to my grandmother for over 50 years. When he was 45 years old, he was told when he had a heart attack that he wouldn't make it to 50. Grandpa lived until he was 92 years old. He saw the invention of the automobile, the airplane, the internet. He even had a smartphone. He didn't know how to use it, but he had one. He had one of those flip phone, like Nokia phones. If you're under 30, these were phones that weren't smart. They just kind of flipped, but they were indestructible. They will go on beyond you. I just want you to know. Like, we're finding dinosaur bones, right? But you're going to find a Nokia phone in its original form, buried under the earth 6,000 years from now, because these phones are indestructible. But he had one, and then he had a case on it, which I don't know why he had a case on it, but he's 93, and I guess he just didn't trust himself, right? He was fascinating to me. And I always wondered what he wondered about. And so anytime I had time to spend with him, I would just fire away questions, and he would answer so intelligently, so graciously. We all have the ability to wonder. You and I have the ability to wonder. And wonder can lead to fear. Wonder can lead to joy. And wonder can lead to more wonder. And when we wonder, we all wonder through a frame of reference. It's how we see the world. And our frame of reference isn't perfect. It might have some broken glass. It might need a fresh coat of paint, right? It might be a big frame. It might be a small frame. But we all wonder through a frame of reference. And honestly, it's not complete. It just causes us to have a sandbox or a framework to be able to wonder. And sometimes we figure things out, right? And then we move on. Other times we figure things out and then we realize that we need to continue to wonder because it opened up a whole new conversation for us. In the world of science, they wonder and they figure things out, but then it causes more wonder. In the early 1900s, they had a theory about the universe. It was called the steady state theory. Anybody familiar with the steady state theory? Awesome, you didn't pay attention in science, nope, okay, good. We all didn't pay attention in science, that's good, awesome. The steady state theory is essentially this, that the universe is just as it is. It just exists, it's static, it's not growing, it's not dying, it is just what it is. And then in 1929, Edwin Hubble observed something through his telescope. He saw planets and stars and solar systems slowly moving away from each other. And so he had a theory that maybe if he was given a big giant rewind button and he hit the rewind button, that he would see all of the planets and stars and the universe come to a single beginning. And he thought maybe the universe isn't static. Maybe it actually has a beginning and it's expanding. It took him a couple of years to convince people that this was actually true, but it was in 1931 that he introduced this idea to Albert Einstein. You may have heard of him. And Einstein was convinced that what Edwin Hubble saw was true. And so together they worked through all of the details and they came up with what's called the cosmic microwave background radiation theory. Anybody ever heard of that? No, because you didn't pay attention in science, all right? Here's the more popular name, the Big Bang Theory. Anybody ever heard of that one? Not the TV show, by the way, but the actual theory, right? The theory is this, that the universe started at some point. Now, as a Christian, we have this conviction that there is a beginning point to the universe and that it actually was very personal. It was created by a creator God. And perhaps there was a Big Bang. When he said, "Let there be light," and the sun comes out, that has to be a Big Bang, right? Either way, they saw what we were wondering about and what we are looking at. We all wondered, where'd this come from? And we all have this theory, we have this idea, and we believe that there's a beginning. See, the point is this, that each of us, our frame of reference, helps us to make sense out of life and helps us to make decisions that make sense. We all have a frame of reference that we see the world through. And it helps us to decide what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's just and what's unjust. Each of us have the ability to wonder, and we wonder through our frame of reference. And here's the thing that I think that you know, but I'm going to say it just so that we all can acknowledge it in this place. We're not a blank slate, meaning that we didn't walk into this world with our own framework that we built. We inherited our framework. It's been influenced by those that loved us and maybe by those that didn't, by the tragedy in our life and by the successes in our life. We inherited our framework. I talked about my grandfather. He's been passed away for 12 years, and yet he still influences my life. He had a saying that he adopted and would say it all the time, and it's something that is in my heart, it's in my DNA. He said, every day, wake up and try something new. And that was the way that he lived his life. And so each day, I want to try something new. I don't want to be afraid of change. He's been passed for 12 years, and yet he's still influencing me. We all have been influenced, and we've inherited some form of our framework. And maybe your framework has been influenced in a very religious sort of way. It's why you're at church today. This is what you do. Or maybe it's been influenced in a kind of religious sort of way. And maybe that's why you're here today, because what you're finding is that what's happening out there is not satisfying the deep longings of your soul. And so you're going to give God a shot. We're glad that you're here. Or maybe your framework has been influenced by the academic world or the scientific world. Or maybe your framework has a very moralistic or opportunistic influence. Or maybe for some of you, and as I've had conversations with friends, I've learned that a lot of us are influenced by these last two, by karma, which everything happens for a reason is kind of the belief, or fate, there's a reason for everything happening. However you've been influenced, we all need to understand that we didn't walk into this situation with our own framework. We have been influenced in some way. And we do one of three things, or all three things. We adopt our framework, or we adapt our framework, or for many of us, we abandon our framework. I'm a Christian kid, born on Saturday, in church on Sunday. I'm probably very different than some of you. And what I've learned is that there are a lot of people who have been part of the church for a long time that have abandoned their framework because of how they've been treated or something that they learned that they felt wasn't godly or wasn't good. And maybe for some of you, you haven't been a part of church for a long time because of that very reason. The truth is that when we do that, when we adopt, when we adapt, or when we abandon, it can actually lead to more wondering. And sometimes wondering can lead to wandering. And wandering is good for a season. Wandering is good for a time as we begin to figure some things out. But the truth is that too much wandering can really cause us to miss out on our purpose and miss out on our significance because we just aren't sure of who we are or where we come from. And so I want to give you an invitation this Christmas season. I want to invite you to invite God into the center of your worldview. I want to invite you to invite God into the center of your worldview. And if you're a Christian and you would maybe respond back, maybe in your head you're like, okay, I'm a Christian, I already do that. Well, good, then this will be easy for you. But I would ask this question, is it really God? Because I think often what we do is when we put God at the center of our worldview, it has a form of God, but sometimes we also get influenced by other things that we like to make God. We like to say this is God. And one of the ways that we can evaluate if God is at the center of our worldview is just ask the question, how do we treat people? Does it actually reflect the heart of God? Because how I feel about God will come out in how I treat people, how I treat you. And so maybe there's some wrestling that you need to do. Maybe you're not a Christian and you would say, listen, Mike, I can't put God at the center of my worldview because then that means I would have to sacrifice my mind. Here's the good news. The early first version of Christianity didn't invite people to shut off their brain. Maybe you think that by faith, you have to have blind faith and you just have to shut off what you know. The first version of Christianity didn't invite that at all, didn't ask for that at all. In fact, the first Christians lived by this command: love the Lord your God with all your mind. That includes everything that you knew, everything that you've observed, everything that you've experienced. God isn't saying you have to now put that aside. God is saying, let's engage your mind. And in fact, I think some of the most miserable people on the planet are those who are not challenged intellectually, especially by those who say that they love and serve a good and gracious and powerful God. Maybe that's one of the reasons why you've stayed away, because you just haven't been challenged intellectually and you thought maybe you need to shut your brain off. Good news, you don't. Because the invitation is to engage your mind. Maybe you would say, well, listen, I can't put God at the center of my framework because then that means I would have to sacrifice my freedom. And I would answer, yep. But here's the thing. You're already doing that. Because every frame of reference requires you to say no to you. You're already saying no to you through the framework that you have currently. All that I'm asking is that you're going to decide what your yeses will be and what your nos will be, and it will be influenced by the God who knows you well. And here's something that I think we need to acknowledge. And I love you, and I don't want to be offensive, but I think we just need to rise this to the surface, and I just want to be honest with you, and if you disagree with me, we can fight later. You'll probably win. But we can talk about it here. I have the microphone, you don't, so that's terrible for you, okay? Here's the thing that's true about your framework and about my framework. It's incomplete. And maybe even incorrect. There's a fatal flaw in our framework, in your framework. The fatal flaw in your framework is you. Because what do you know really? What do you know really? What's true about all of us is this, that your framework and my frame of reference and your frame of reference, it changes in every season, doesn't it? Here's how I know. Do you remember when you were a kid and mom and dad or guardian or whoever was in charge of you would drive you to the dentist and you hated the dentist? Or when they would take you to the doctor and you hated the doctor? You didn't want people picking at your teeth. You didn't want to get the shot, right? The only way that you made it through was because there was a promise of a sticker or a sucker afterwards, right? And now today, for some of you as adults, you drive yourself to the dentist and you drive yourself to the doctor. Your frame of reference changed, didn't it? Do you remember when you were sure they were the one and now you want out? Do you remember you had to have it and now you don't know where it is? Do you remember you had to go and now you wish you never went? Do you remember when you were so mad you grit your teeth until you heard the whole story? Here's the point. Our frame, your frame, all of our frames, our frame of reference is limited. It's limited. And this is why God and what he's done is so brilliant and so extraordinary. Because God could have waited for us to figure him out through our frame. And maybe because I'm a Christian kid, born and raised in the church, I would have a head start. Maybe for some of you, you wouldn't have what I have. You wouldn't know what I know. And God could have just allowed us to figure that out. Well, Mike had good parents who raised him in the church, and this person didn't. And so Mike's going to be able to figure this out to the best of his ability, and they'll figure this out maybe to the best of their ability, and we'll figure it out all at the very end. God could have waited for us to figure it out, but he didn't. Instead, God sent someone to our side of the frame to help us know what God is like. So instead of going, okay, I hope that you understand who I am and what I'm about, and I hope that you understand this doctrine and this theology and what that person is teaching, God said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to clear the way. And I'm going to knock over all the hurdles. I'm going to bring clarity the best way that I know how. I'm going to show up. I'm going to go ahead and show up and come to your side of the frame. This is the story of Christmas. This is the story that all of us are influenced by. In fact, the first Jews who honored God were wrecked by the story of Christmas because they thought they had God figured out. This is how you follow him. This is how you serve him. This is what you do if you sin. This is what you do when you love people. And then Christmas happened. And they went, say what? And then the writer of one of the letters of the scriptures, the letter is called Hebrews, writes a letter to those that are wrestling with this idea. And he explains who that someone is and what that someone has done and why it's important for you and for me and for the original reader. And then he asks a question. And so I want to do the same thing today as we get started and talk about wonder. So if you brought a Bible with you or if you have the Bible app on your phone, I want to invite you, we're going to be in two places. I want to invite you to turn to Hebrews, which is a letter in the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 4, starting in verse 14. If you don't have a Bible or access to it on your phone, don't worry about it. We'll have the verses on the screen for you along with some notes to help you follow along. But the writer is introducing this idea of what we've just talked about, and then he gets to kind of the culmination of this conversation. And in Hebrews chapter 4, starting in verse 14, the writer says this: therefore, in light of everything that we've talked about, thinking and considering everything that we've walked through, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens. The writer uses a very culturally relevant term for the first readers. Maybe for us, it's not very relevant. He calls and talks about the high priest. During this season of life and when this letter was popular and was being circulated, the high priest was the one that would represent God to the people. And his job was very specific. He would speak on behalf of God, he would teach on behalf of God, he would serve on behalf of God, and he would help people to know where they stood with God. For us, it may be more in the form of maybe a pastor or a leader or someone that is involved in the church. And the writer is helping them to understand what he's about to share with them by giving them something culturally relevant. And then he says, this great high priest. So now he's saying, you know about the high priest? Let me tell you about the great high priest. He is bigger and better than the one that you know because this high priest has gone through the heavens. He has intimate knowledge of God. And the reason why he has intimate knowledge of God is because his name is Jesus, the Son of God. See, the Jewish people believed that God was going to do something in the world for the world. They just thought he was going to come on a tank, or maybe for them, a couple of camels. They thought he was going to come and just knock over thrones and kingdoms. That was their frame of reference. That's what they learned. And then came the unexpected Jesus as a baby. And they went, this doesn't fit my framework. Help me to understand what you're doing here, God. And then the writer continues this thought in Hebrews chapter 12. If you want to turn there, you're welcome to, or flip there on your phone. Again, the verses will be on the screen. The writer completes this thought as he's challenging the first readers and challenging us. And the writer says, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. This is an interesting comment because the writer just listed in the previous chapter names of people that interacted with God in ancient times. We call it Old Testament times. And then he lists people who interacted with the real Jesus that people at this time could go and have a conversation with. This is this writer's invitation to anybody reading this letter. It's his invitation to go, fact check me. You think I'm making it up? There are so many people you could read, and there are so many people you could talk to that will tell you that I'm not making this up. That Jesus was real. He was a real person who really lived, who really died, and you can go to his tomb then and now, and his tomb is empty. And then for some of the people, over 500 of the people, some that were still alive when this letter was being circulated, you could go and talk to them, and they will tell you, we saw him die, and then 3 days later, he came walking out of that tomb. We had fish with him. We had breakfast with him. We had a meal with him. It was really him. This is the writer going, fact check me. I'm not making this up. Because there's no benefit for me to make this up. And because Jesus is real and Jesus has come, then there's an invitation for us to step into. He says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. You know exactly what this looks like. Because many of you, when you come home from a long day at work or a long day with sports or a long day at whatever you were doing, you walk in the house and you tear off the jacket, you kick off your shoes, and whoever it is that you live with, maybe a spouse, a significant other, maybe your kids, maybe your parents, whatever it might be, they'll tell you to clean up your mess, and you'll go, listen, I need 5 minutes. I need a cup of coffee, Disney Plus, and I need to sit on my butt for 5 minutes, right? Because what you're doing is you're stepping into peace. You're going from chaos to peace. That's what this writer is inviting us to do in light of what Jesus has done and that Jesus has come. And then he says, we're going to deal with your sin. Now, maybe you're not a sin language sort of person, or maybe as a Christian you have this weird filter of what sin actually looks like. Maybe what Pastor Josh said to us last week is your perspective of God, that you're sinking in a river and God has a life preserver and he throws it out, but if you don't say the right things or do the right things, he'll pull the life preserver back. But the image of a father with their child is more of the image of a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And when you hear sin, you get uncomfortable and it's cringy. All the writer is saying is this: listen, there are standards that you have that you violate. What do you do when you violate your own standards? Let alone the standards that God has built into you. What do you do when you violate those standards? You can't solve it. You can't fix it. You can't forgive it. You can try to move on. You can try to read the book. You can try to watch the TV show. You might think Dr. Phil has something really good to say to you, and perhaps he even does, but it doesn't resolve the guilt and the shame and the embarrassment that's inside of you that you can't get rid of. And that is why Jesus came. Because he's the one and only one that can deal with the deeply rooted brokenness in our hearts and in our souls. That's why the writer says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Listen, Christianity didn't begin with a book, a theology, a doctrine, or a behavior. It has a book, it has a theology, it has a doctrine, it has a behavior, but it didn't begin because of that. Christianity began with a person, and his name is Jesus. And he died, and he rose, and he came to be with you and to be like you. And the writer describes him this way: the author and the perfecter of our faith. It begins and ends in Jesus. It starts and finds its finish in Jesus. And so for every beginning and every starting point, it begins and starts with reconciliation, and every finish and ending point, it finishes and it ends with redemption. Notice I didn't say condemnation. Notice I didn't say judgment, because that's not the story of God sending Jesus. If you've ever felt that, it's not the Christmas story. Because the story of God sending Jesus is one that invites us to tell a better story. And then the writer says, here's why we can trust in Jesus, who, talking about Jesus, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I have a note from my wife when we were dating that I carry around with me in my wallet. It's faded. You can't really make out what the note says. It's from when we first started dating, so that's almost 19, 20 years ago. And we're only 27. And this note is precious to me, not for what's specifically in the note, although my wife wrote, I love you because, and she wrote down all the reasons why she loves me, and they were all true and fantastic. I think humility might have been in there as well. But the best part of the note was the end, where she said, I love you, and then she put my name, she put Mike. And the reason why I get emotional about it, the reason why it stirs my heart, is because I never thought I'd have that. I know that you're gonna be shocked by this statement, but growing up, I was never smooth when it came to the ladies. I know you're shocked by that. I know you're surprised by that. If I had a middle name that I could pick, it would be awkward, right? I'm now married, but I'm still awkward, so it's awesome. But she put my name in the note. And this writer put your name in his letter because your name is joy. Because the joy that was set before Jesus is you. And that's why he went to the cross. And that's why he rose from the grave. You are not a bother to God. You are not a pain in his backside. You are his joy. And this is why he came. And this is why he does what he does. Your name and my name is found in the ancient letters of the Bible because you are his joy. Which brings us to the question that this writer asks, and I will ask you, and I will ask of myself, would you consider him? Would you consider him? And by the way, the word consider can be defined this way: to carefully think about and be drawn towards action. I think a lot of us don't experience hope because we spend all of our time through the framework that we have thinking about God, but it never leads us anywhere. That's why God sent Jesus to our side of the frame. I think a lot of us haven't experienced love because we've spent all of our time thinking about God through our frame of reference, and we never take a step into God's love. That's why God sent Jesus to our side of the frame. We need to understand that our considering always leads, when it has to do with God, always leads to courageous action. It's not the announcement that you are now someone who knows everything that you need to know. In fact, it's why you and I are a part of this better story today. It's why we're deciding to take a step forward, because we decided to take a courageous act by showing up today. It's not an announcement that we have it all figured out. It's just considering the one that the writer says this: consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Maybe the reason why you're weary and maybe the reason why you are losing heart is because you've spent so much time considering through your framework and you've missed that God has sent Jesus to your side of the frame. It's why 5 times a year we have what we call Baptism Sunday, which is the Sunday that you've joined us, where people make decisions in a very public way about the very personal work that God has done in their life. And they're not getting into this water today to say that they have it all figured out. In fact, baptism is not about knowing everything. Baptism is about knowing someone. Jesus, who came to our side of the frame. And baptism is an announcement that you are now going to live life in the best and most perfect way. In fact, baptism is not about your perfection. You decide to get baptized today, and I just want you to know that later on today, you'll be tempted by the thing that you're always tempted by, even though you got into the water today. And that maybe later on today, you will do the thing that you don't want to do, that you fight not to do, but you always seem to do it. And so you got baptized to think that you're not going to do it, but now you're still tempted to do it. Are you with me? That tension doesn't go away. You're just deciding that you're going to walk through that tension with the God who came to our side of the frame. Baptism, amen, yeah. Baptism is about your new direction. I'm going to do life with God rather than opposing God. I'm going to do life with God rather than trying to figure God out. I'm going to do life with God and have him there where I can ask him questions. I'm going to do life with God so that I can engage him. I'm not going to let my frame dictate what God is and what he's done and how he loves. I'm going to let God tell me all of that. So this is why we baptize. And I know maybe for some of you, if you have a religious framework, your religious framework will tell you that all of the work of God is private and you should keep it private. But what you find with Jesus, who came to our side of the frame, is he says all the work of God is personal and should be announced publicly in what you say and in what you do and in how you act. And that's why we get baptized. Here's the fascinating thing that happens on baptism Sundays. There are those who are sitting in the room with us today that have planned for this day. You're ready to go. You're waiting for me to shut up so that you can get into the water and celebrate the love and the work of God in you. But then what happens often is that we have people that will come in that didn't plan for it, but God has been preparing you as we've had a conversation. And so I want you to know if that's you, we have planned for you. We have the change of clothes that you would need. We have the friends that you can surround yourself with in the back. We have the support and the encouragement that you would need. It's time for you to get out of the consideration boat and allow your consideration to lead you to courageous action. And that courageous act is to announce that Jesus is Lord. And I don't have them all figured out, but he's got me figured out. And I want to do life with him rather than away from him. And so I want to pray for you. And then when we're finished praying, I want to give you an invitation. Those that have been prepared to get baptized and those of you that are being prepared in this moment to get baptized. There is a space and a spot for you. This is for everyone. You might have all sorts of excuses right now. And all of your excuses, I love you, they're stupid. This is for everyone. Because Jesus came to my side of the frame and your side of the frame. And so today I would ask you to consider him and have that lead you to careful, courageous action. Let me pray for you. So God, this decision is not to be done lightly, is not to be done without thought, but it is a decision that we can make not knowing everything and not being perfect. It is a decision that we can wrestle with and say yes to, and then continue to wrestle with who you are and what you're doing. God, I pray for those that have been prepared for this moment, that are ready to go. And God, I pray for those that are being prepared in this moment and want to be ready to go. And I pray in this next moment we would celebrate incredible life change. God, we've already seen 10 friends first service get baptized today. And I pray for those that are going to make the step today to say, God, you've done some great personal work in me, and I want to publicly announce that your love is the best love, and your way is the best way. And I will chase after that, and I will pursue that with my life. God, I pray that this moment would be a stake in the ground and would allow us to celebrate the Christmas story like we've never celebrated it before. Thank you, God. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So here's what I'd like to do in this moment.
Thank you again for joining us for this week's message. We believe your generosity is changing the world. If you'd like to partner with us, click the link in the description below. And we'll see you again next week.